The key difference is an agent has a mission, has an objective. It doesn't have the how, it doesn't have the knowledge. And it has tools to figure out the how, to figure out the knowledge. And it comes back with the result. And this is really the transformation we're seeing now. This is the big hype, right now, and the future is agent work, which is a very interesting, like there are some areas where that makes a lot of sense. And there are some areas, well, not quite. We see people now with agents, they got good enough. Every company that's not building agents in their workflow is going to need to figure out what part of their business are going to lose. That's just like their daily reality right now.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure to have Lior Weinstein with us. Lior is a serial entrepreneur with a background in growth and technology, currently fractional CTO and CRO for $20 to $100 million revenue companies. He's the founder of CTOX, which is a fractional CTO company. He's given over 40 AI workshops in recent months, and his life's mission is to dissolve people's self-limiting beliefs so they can be creative and pursue happiness. Lior, it's so great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So we know each other through some masterminds that we're in. Genius Network is the one that pops to mind. I think there might be another mastermind that we had in common as well. Did we?
All these things blend at this point. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Anyways, I love Genius Network. I've had a number of my friends from Genius Network on this show, and now you, another one of my friends from Genius Network. So I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe Polish.
Yeah. And Joe is an amazing guy, an amazing marketer who also has been on the show. And if our listener hasn't heard that episode, please check out the Joe Polish episode on the show. So, Lior, why don't you give a little bit of backstory about your rise to tech stardom? Like, how did you? What were your humble beginnings?
So I grew up in Israel, and as you know, Israel is a big tech hub. Building tech companies is practically a sport, in the country. I was an entrepreneur from a very early age, got into online things, with BBSs before, we had the World Wide Web. And got a chance to start my...
Did you know that I started my own BBS as well when I was, I think, 12 or 13-year-old?
I love those connections. We just had it in one of my groups as well. You clock somebody when you say that, and they instantly have these memories of how it used to be.
I wrote the BBS myself too. I wrote it in BASIC from scratch.
I got a chance to start kind of work on my first business, like an actual limited liability company, when I was 14, and build actual like commercial software by the time I was 17. So pretty early on in the software world, and at the same time I grew up in marketing. 20 years ago everybody called us affiliate marketers. And then over the years those names changed to digital marketers, performance marketers, and so on. And those were my growth tracks at the same time. So I kind of grew up in the technology space and in the growth space, pretty much parallel, and I translated that to businesses that I built, and all of them I took those positions. So either was the technology guy, kind of the CTO, or the product guy, integrating between what customers want and, how to build, and then of course the growth and the marketing. So I kind of butterflied between those positions and activities. Got a chance to build a few startups, exit a couple, buy quite a few online businesses and flip them, kind of make them better and flip them. Sometimes it's making them better by changing the technology. Sometimes it's by doing better marketing and growth. And I'm utterly unemployable. So this is my life for.
Yeah, me too. How many businesses have you bought and flipped?
Well over a couple dozen. Wow. Dozen. And as small as like $70,000 forum to $4 or $5 million of e-commerce software, those kind of companies. Yeah.
So the $70,000 online forum, how much did you sell that for?
That one was actually great because I bought it for 70. I made, I think, like 150 on it, and then I think I sold it also for 150, and all of that was in a span of like 18 months. And doing a bunch more in parallel was one of those opportunistic, nice kind of cash flips.
Yeah. And what was the secret to make it perform much better than it had prior to with the previous owner?
So I think at the time, so this was a period where I did a lot of this between like 2014 and 2017, and you still had this lag of old websites that were pretty good on traffic and SEO rankings, but they never updated their stack, right? I think now it's going to be fairly rare to find. So that was one of those examples. It was built, I think, on like BB Forum or one of those, and just updating the tech, adding better features, making it faster, automatic reminders for people to log in and message, stuff like that. Just really increase the traffic. Similar thing, I bought a network of like kids websites that the original founder built in like Dreamweaver. I'm also dating myself and everybody that understands what that means. And with like static files and Flash games. But he had great content, great traffic, and that's the opportunity. Like go in, update the designs, add WordPress at the time, make everything link better, make new content strategies, HTML5 games instead of Flash. So that was a pretty good playbook for those few years to just get old websites that had a lot of traffic but didn't change their stack and make it better, modern, to increase engagements.
That's cool. And what was the worst kind of mistake, flop, buy and flip that you did?
Oh man. So I would say my worst one is actually an offline business. So I think, and I've seen this years later. I've met a bunch of other entrepreneurs. Everybody has that, when you have a lot of successes, you think you have like a Midas touch, like, oh, sure, I can make any business work. And I ended up buying a spa, like an actual offline business. And it was, opportunistic with a friend that could have managed it and that kind of a story. And it was absolutely terrible. And it was so bad. I think it was like I bought it for 100 or 120,000.
Did you end up ruining a friendship over it?
No, and that's
No.
I pride myself in that. I don't have any bridges burned in my life, not that I'm aware of. Anyway, and but yeah, we ran it for like 9 months or a year, and I just closed it. Meaning, I didn't even bother selling it. Literally, like just shut it down, and it taught me a lot. Also, one of the things it taught me is that I really am not an offline kind of guy. That's not my skill set and not my intuition, and also not my passion. Like it's not. I don't get. Some people. I have family members. They like the store, right? They like the being in a space and people coming in and smiling and kind of being the host, right? And that's just not my shtick. That was definitely my worst flop in terms of like nothing went right, from the acquisition to the operation to the shutdown. And then when I had another interesting one, so when I had the kids' websites, somebody was selling. I think it was like coolmath.com. And coolmath.com or coolmath.net, good domain. It was like 20 grand or something. And it was 10 or 20 grand, something like that. We bought it. And I completely, just bought the domain, got it over to the registrar, didn't think twice. One day, probably 6, 8 months after, I log into my registrar for something else, and I see like a notice around that domain. I'm like, what is this? So there's a company that has that trademark. So it's like Cool Math Games, something like that. Company, I think, out of New York. And they basically sent a letter to ICANN about like trademark violation or something like that, basically claiming the domain. Now, the contact details, once we did the domain change, I never updated them. I never updated them to my like email or my anything. So I never got any of these notices. Now, for context, if anybody's listening to this and you have the same thing, it's actually a very easy thing to fight, right? You're like, well, you can explain the transaction, right? Plus, nothing on the content itself would infringe or anything like that. But because they sent multiple letters, multiple notices, nobody answered. They already had a judgment, and it was like this judgment in Switzerland or something, like an arbitrator. And basically, I was at the end of it, meaning they were like, this domain is moving on this date. Like
Wow.
it wasn't. So I lost the entire thing. So we paid 10, 20 grand, forgot to update the who is, contact records. They submitted and they won, and I got it taken from me. So that was like, ooh, that was an expensive lesson. So anybody here, if you buy domains, and I bought plenty since, update the contact details on the domain. So
Yeah.
that was one of those painful moments for sure.
Wow. Do you use privacy protection on your domains?
Yeah, yeah.
So you just bought a three-letter domain, .com, that I don't know if you want to share that or any details about it on the episode. Are you willing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I bought CTO.com, big three letters. So like in the past, so now I'm in the business of helping CTOs and chief technology officers, if you don't know what the acronym is. And the original business was started. So I've been a fractional CTO for quite a few years for different companies. And what fractional CTO is basically, I'm de facto the CTO, but it's not a full-time thing, right? So I kind of say I can give them 100% of the outcome for a fraction of the cost. So I describe fractional as is about the cost, not about the impact. Because the reality is most businesses that are not tech businesses, they don't make their living by selling technology. They're just enabled by tech. They don't need somebody like me, full time. Doesn't make financial sense, but they can certainly use the experience. So I've been doing this for a few years, and now I teach other CTOs how to do that. And when we started that business, I realized, man, this would be really fun if we could just be like CTO.com. And that was another interesting domain story. So I looked up the owner at the time, and the website had nothing to do with tech. It was like a music staffing placement business in Philly. So he owned it since 97 or 98. And that was like the acronym of the business. It was like a CTO artist or something like that. It still exists, that business. And I looked up the owner, sent him an email, didn't answer, found him on LinkedIn, sent him a message, didn't answer. And a few months later, a good friend of mine who's a domainer, and domainer, if you don't know, is people who broker domains for a living. I'm on his email list, and I get an email like 10:30 at night, his newsletter, and suddenly I see CTO.com for sale and make offers. And I'm like, well, I instantly text him because like we know each other.
What are the odds, huh?
Or incredible. This was like 2, 3 months after, right, that I sent that LinkedIn.
Well, we've had many conversations about this offline. Like this reality thing, it's totally a rigged game. Like that was a setup for you, my friend.
That serendipity was, I mean, think about it. Like, really, what are the odds, right? The guy's been owning it since 98, 97. Never sold it. Never had it for sale until. And 2, 3 months after I try to reach out to him, suddenly get this email. Text my friend. And I asked him, are you the buyer side or seller side? He's like, seller side. I'm like, okay, we need to speak. And then over a few months, we negotiate. And it was, a great acquisition on both sides.
Yeah. Was it six figures? Must
Oh
have
yeah,
been.
yeah. I think so. We, the domain, the broker asked me if I'm okay revealing the amount. I'm like, yeah, sure, but the seller preferred not to.
Okay.
But I think for 2024, it when we looked at it, I think it was like early December when we spoke. It would have been the highest paid three-letter domain for the year.
Hmm.
The highest paid acquisition three-letter domain for the year. So I don't know what other transactions ended up happening at that last part of the year. We did ours like middle of the year, um, but if not the highest paid, certainly top two or three. Um, great, and that was also one of those. He didn't sell in '99 with the .com, but think about it, when he bought in '97, '98, there weren't CTOs. You had like IT managers, maybe. He didn't sell in '99, 2000 .com. He didn't sell in 2008. You know, he didn't sell it in the COVID rush, right? So that was like a big deal. Holding that domain for like 26 years, and then selling it right when I want to buy it. It was, serendipity, synchronicity, call it whatever you want, but it worked. And
Yeah.
we're planning to
Well,
build a large
it's a divine setup, really.
and we're planning to build the largest community of techies on that domain. So we hope it's going to be a very big thing in the next few years.
Amazing. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now I know that you've done a number of AI workshops. You did, I think, 40 of them, right?
Yeah.
And you're kind of burned out from doing all those roadshow, AI workshops, I think now. But what inspired you to do it in the first place, and then what was the impetus to stop?
So it was interesting. So when ChatGPT came out, so this is late November 2022. Um, Obviously amazing. Some of us who have played with the previous models, GPT 2 and GPT 1, huge upgrade. And immediately just 2 weeks prior, I was in one of our kind of coaching groups, and I was talking about other AI tools that I use for content creation, right, for different things. And then suddenly it comes out, everybody's kind of buzzing on WhatsApp and kind of our groups, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know like how to think about it, how it works. So I'm like, oh, what, I'll just start doing that. I'll like teach my friends how to think about it. So the very first talk I did was like just a month, like first week of January, after it came out, and I call it, and that's the same talk I gave over 40 times at this point, which is AI models and methods, like how to think about AI, how to do AI. And the talk was very principled, like helping people understand the best way to think about it so it's more intuitive and not this kind of flashbang, deer in the headlights, here's 20 prompts, but really kind of give them the skill. So it started with me trying to make it more accessible for my friends, and then it just like picked up. And I think the smallest I've done it for was like 4 people on Zoom, maybe three. And the most was thousands, like many thousands on a stage. And even the last one was actually like a couple of weeks ago. It was a 1,000 like live webinar. It was like this master class that somebody asked me to run an hour on. Um, and it's great. Like every time I do it, I like it. Like I get energy from people, like seeing the dots connect. I'll give you some examples of some of the stuff that I say that really make people think differently about it. Um, but it's not my business, meaning I don't have like an AI training company. I don't have an AI service studio. I'm not an AI consultant, which I could have done all these things. Like every time I give one of those talks, I get a lineup. But I don't want to, be in the professional services industry. I've been there, in the past. So that's why, it was a lot of fun. And I think now, 2 years in, everybody feels way more confident and take it more for granted. Still probably underestimating it in some areas. But now the world, I think, is more caught up than it was. Now, for me, it's also different because, when I have 5 patents in AI and machine learning, one of them is literally like structuring unstructured content, like back from 2017. So I have a lot of brain cycles on this area. I Back in Israel, I used my first simulated neural network when I was about 14. The Technion, which is kind of the Israeli MIT, they did a project at my school, and a couple of us were kind of in this special project. So we got to work on it for like a week or two with like neural network, like building, simulation, construction. So my brain has been thinking about this problem in this area for many years. But because I have a strong marketing background and product background, I think it was just easier for me to explain it to people, so they understand it, and it's not just like scary, or it's not just too much gobbledygook. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What are some of the examples that you said you see people light up in these workshops when you teach them some new skill or insight or way of thinking differently?
So certainly that January, I had this slide, and a month later I said it on stage as well. Now a lot of people say it, but at the time nobody said it, which is, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you will be replaced by people using AI. And we talked about Joe Polish. Joe Polish actually filmed me say that back in February 2023. As proof, like I said it on stage, everyone was like, whoa. And that was like one mental model. Another one is explaining. So I do this kind of live audience thing, and to illustrate how large language models work. And besides me explaining like other AI, that's not just large language models. But I explained to them, put aside the concept of a prompt. Just say what the LLM is trying to do is figure out the next best word, right? And I was joking, it's kind of like Anna and Frozen kind of phrase. But what's the next best word? What are we trying to do? And anything you put in is the before, and anything the LLM outputs is the after. And then I do this exercise, and I tell the audience, I'm going to give you a word. You can do this live. So the first word is old, and I'm going to ask you, what's the next word after that? So what do you think is the next word after old, if that's the only word I give you?
Man.
Man. Great. And then I have an audience, right? So I'm like, man, person, news, car, street, dog. Da, da. And then usually there's some repeats, right? I'm like, okay, it's here like 3 news, 4 mans, 5 persons, and so on. I'm like, great. And then I'm going to give you the next word after old. The next word after old is McDonald. So now we have old McDonald. What's the next word after that?
Had.
And then everybody had. I'm like, see, in statistics, we call this like 99% confidence, right? And that's what it does. And that's what it does at scale. Old McDonald had a farm. Now, could a phrase have been Old McDonald was a bastard? Yes, it could have been. Is it high probability that's the phrase? No. And then explain the concept of temperature, which is really what that is. So LLMs kind of scrape the world, right? Whatever corpus of text that they have. And they count the repetitiveness, like the pairing of words. Like if it only saw the word Weinstein after Lior, then every time you put Lior, it's going to put the word Weinstein. But the one time we would have seen Cohen, then now it's not going to be 100% Weinstein. It's going to start being Lior Cohen or Lior Levi and so on and so forth. And this concept of temperature is really like how much creative or how much lower in the probabilistic scale it's going to choose different words. And then you get, basically creativity. And it's quite fascinating that statistics and mathematics, mimic humans, right? Like it's kind of weird that it works. It's weird that you put in a word and it projects the next set of words and you think it makes sense as a human, right? It's wild. It's incredible. So that alone, usually I do that exercise and that's a big like coin drop because now people have an intuitive sense of what's going on. They also understand now there's, no intelligence. I hate when they call artificial intelligence. I don't like calling it that, but it's a useful label. There's no intelligence, right, when you're running statistics. And now when you understand that mechanism, now you can understand, okay, well, if it didn't scan for the words, it can't have an answer. That's why you can't ask it for stuff about your personal life unless you give it information. It just doesn't know, and it can't, reason around information it doesn't have. And that's why when you hear Sam Altman and Jensen Huang and those guys talk, the big breakthrough is going to be when it can create new information, right? When it can discover new things. Right now, it's just this incredible word salad, and we like the salad, right? But that's really what's happening. So it's not like equivalent to a human. It's not equivalent to intelligence, but it's extremely useful because the reality is a lot of human activities are just basic like that.
Now, you mentioned earlier about this temperature, and if someone has more, like a user has more tolerance for error and they want more creativity, can they say, you have a wider range for temperature here, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever AI they're talking to, and then it will get more creative and it will not just keep using Weinstein every time that it sees Lior?
So there's the products themselves, like ChatGPT and Claude is a product, and then there's the underlying technology. The underlying technology, you can change the temperature up and down as much as you want. If you go to like the developer backbone of OpenAI, not the ChatGPT product, but like if you log in through the developer area, then you have basically the same kind of chat window, but you have the dials. You actually have like a temperature dial. ChatGPT, for example, is set at 80, right? Like 80% temperature or 0.8. So you can just move that dial up and down. And the lowest temperature means just the most probable. So if you had temperature 1, an old person was the most common pairing after the word old, then every time it would have been old, right? So there are some reasons why you would want to have a low temperature or a high temperature. So for highly creative stuff, you don't want 100% temperature for most things, because then you also lower usability, right? Because you're end of the day, you're using the tool to use something. Like you wanted to write something.
And then you're much more likely to infringe on people's copyrights too, right?
On lower temperature, not on higher temperature.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So when I ask for a new song to be written with the lyrics and I set the temperature low, then it's going to probably rip off other people's lyrics.
If it's gonna be super low, the reality is like really one. The reality is the chances are for a neural network to actually output something that like unique and specific is very low. Very low to the point of improbable. Now, where do we see it sometimes? We see it sometimes with like proper copyrighted terms, right? So let's say you make up a word, right? Like Dan Sullivan, for example, he makes up a lot of words, right? As part of his IP in his business. So then you kind of know suddenly when you see that word, that's a Dan Sullivan word. Then it certainly took it from Dan Sullivan content, right? Lyrics is a bit different, right? For lyrics, 2 words, that's hard to claim. You took it from a song. But if you have 4 words in a row, 8 words in a row, that's way easier. Now, for a neural network to output the same 8 words in a row, that's even on low temperature, that's not very probable. Now, some cases, low temperature makes a lot of sense. So when you're doing like enterprise applications, when you're trying to you're trying to get information from official compliant content like IRS tax codes, legal documents, court documents, your own enterprise data, you don't want high temperature, right? Because you want like direct reflection of something. Now, there's a lot of other tools besides the large language models. So if the large language model is this amazing way to reason, right? That's what it is. And that's another thing I say in those talks. I say that LLMs, they're reasoning machines, they're not a fact machine, right? I think a lot of people come in the beginning and they look at it like Google. It's not Google. Google is really good at facts, really good at it, right? Way better than anyone. And they suck at reasoning. And ChatGPT and the like, they're amazing at reasoning. They're not very good at facts, right? For those 2 reasons. So now ChatGPT as a product, it is getting better. But a lot of people, like a year and a half ago, were still like using it like Google, and they ask ChatGPT questions and then they quote ChatGPT. I was actually just in a workshop a month ago, and somebody was showing a quote, and it was like quote that's like a fact. It was like a definition of something, like a definition of a word. And it was using ChatGPT, and I'm like, whoa, can't do that. And I told him, like I told the organizer, can't do that. You cannot use ChatGPT for reference. Bad idea. Right? Don't do that.
Yeah. That's almost as bad as using a magic 8-ball.
Yeah, because in a way it is, because you're literally like randomly choosing the words. Not completely random, but it's not a fact. It's not Webster's, right? It's not an official curated definition that's agreed on by humans.
So, what are some of the prompting tricks and tips that you like to give in these workshops?
I would say by far. So I teach people that the muscles we've used over the last 25 years that Google's been around, 25, 26, are the exact wrong muscles that you need for large language models. So if we were trained to think in snippets, and then of course Twitter made it worse, and social media made it worse, large language models love words. So the more words, the better. And so I recommend, and I kind of compliment, like I tell them, if you're like a blabbermouth, if you don't know how to stop speaking, this is perfect. You're going to have a great time. Because the more words you put in, the better the output. And I recommend to people just talk to it like a person. Just think, if you had a consultant in the room or somebody you want to consult with, you're not going to come to them like Google and tell them, great restaurants Atlanta, right? You're not going to do that to a human, right? To a human, you're going to go and say, hey, I want to go on a date with my wife. She doesn't like Chinese, and, we have a babysitter on Thursday. Can you recommend some romantic place, that's not more than like 20 minutes drive? And you would give the whole context. And that's the best way to use it. So just think conversational, not instruction.
And are you talking to it, or are you typing on it?
So one of my favorite tips is I tell people, people have a writer's block, but they don't have a talker's block. So I highly recommend talking, because it's way more natural. And especially now with the products, like the voice modes and all that are just phenomenal. On my computer, when I'm on my computer, I type fast, and I type way faster than I speak. And I'm used to typing conversationally. If I'm on the go or with my phone, I absolutely talk. Way easier. Way easier. So that's by far the two kind of best modalities. Just talk to it like a person, give it full context, just everything about it, just like you would describe to another person, and then talk to it, not type, because it'll be more natural. Then I would also recommend to think about the final output. Meaning with Google, again, you're thinking about the start of a journey. So let's say you're doing research on something, and let's say it's a travel or business. You're going to Google for the snippets, and then in your mind, well, I'm going to copy this eventually to, Excel, or I'm going to write a report, or I'm doing this for, a presentation. Right? You're not telling Google any of this. But for ChatGPT, you should. So if you're starting a session with it, and you're like, hey, I'm working on a presentation for work, or I'm preparing my travel schedule, with the kids, whatever. Just say it and then go into the tasks, because it will make sure that the formatted outputs it's in, because that's the language wizardry, right? It can already decide that it knows that if you're sending it as an email or as a presentation or as a document, it knows how to manipulate the content so it fits into that format. So just say what you're doing, give it the project, especially now these context windows are so large. We're already like getting into these kind of crazy 7-figure context windows. So a single prompt can be a few books. Well, it's great. But it keeps the context. So as you're having conversations with it, tell it, what are you doing? What's the project? And then keep feeding it with information, and keep just iterating with it, and let it do the work for you. So that's some of the new muscles people need to learn. where they're used to using tools like Google um, and any kind of a resource hub, and they do snippets of information. They take clips of it, right? And then they copy it somewhere, and then they organize it. With these new LLMs, just give it the whole thing and let it organize it from the beginning. When you talk to it like a person, and then you talk instead of type, and you kind of seed it with your intent, like what are you trying to do? Those three principles are going to get you everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Now, like anything, I mean, you and I, we've been in the Google world for many years, and we use Google very differently than most people. And we also, I'm sure you know some people that are like Google wizards, right? That are just phenomenal information finders, right? They know all the modifiers, all the crazy ways to. That's the same way. I mean, with LLMs, you have a lot of.
I wrote a book about that. I'm one of those people. Google Power Search is a book all about how to do all that ninja stuff.
Yeah, so there's the ninja stuff in LLMs as well. But the ninja stuff, I don't think is worth um, the extra brain cycles, that it takes, and especially because what the product teams are trying to do, like the Chat GPTs, the Claudes, they're trying to make it easy for you, just like Google's trying to make it easy for you. So they're really trying to understand what are you searching when you put in words into Google. That's the same way with the LLMs. Like they're really trying to make sure that you speak naturally, and they're going to give you the best result, as opposed to you figuring out all the wizardries on how to best use it. So I wouldn't obsess about it. I think when I see these like, prompt packs and 400 prompts to da da da, it reminds me in the 90s where people like downloaded a list of websites, and like we had it in a text file on our computer, right? So I think people buy the packs and never use it. I guess that's the last kind of big principle thing. Like try to make it functional. Like do it on purpose. So as opposed to just vacuum information and prompts that you're never going to use. If you know you're working on marketing projects, go get marketing prompts. But specifically, if you're doing like video, go get video prompts. Don't just hoard, endless prompts, because the reality is you're just not going to use them.
Right, and you're not skating to where the puck is going. To use the Wayne Gretzky quote.
That's right.
Because this is not future focused. Prompt packs and trying to get the languaging right, act as if blah 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 blah. That doesn't skate to where the puck is going. Like we're just going to be able to interface our personal agent that knows everything about us that we trust with the LLM, and they're going to have the conversation. We're not going to have the conversation.
Yeah. And it's all about seeding context, end of the day. That's really what the exercise is. Just giving more and more and more context, so it filters those words that it's trying to figure out what words to generate, so it matches as much context as possible as you give it. So and right now that it seems like the future is going to the agent universe, which is this holy grail in AI that we've had for many years in theory. It's not there quite yet, but it's amazing to see what we have so far. But that's another thing. So depending on how long I have the workshop for, I might get into the edges of agents, and I'll share with you these mental models that are very useful to think about agents. So you can think about an agent like an oracle, so an all-knowing thing. Sorry, not an agent, about AI. Like an oracle. So it's an all-knowing thing, meaning you ask it any questions and it just has an answer, right? Because it has access to all the information in the world, and it can generate new insights, new information, and give you an answer. You can think about it like a genie. So you give it a task, give it something, and it just magic, and it gets it done, and it gives you the result. Or lastly, which is that holy grail, you can think about it like an agent. And the key difference is an agent has a mission, has an objective. It doesn't have the how, it doesn't have the knowledge. And it has tools to figure out the how, to figure out the knowledge, and it comes back with the result. And this is really the transformation we're seeing now. This is the big hype, right now in in 25, the big conversation is around SaaS is dead, like or SaaS is dying rather, because the future is agent work, which is a very interesting. Like there are some areas where that makes a lot of sense, and there are some areas, not quite. Not that's quite. It's not a relevant like mental model for the problem or the solution. But we see it. We see people now, with agents. They got good enough. Um, just this week, somebody in our group asked us about like scraping a website if we know a scraper. Right? So now he asked a bunch of technologists if they know a scraper. I'm like, yeah, here's a bunch of links that he got and a bunch of like GitHub libraries, right, to scrape the page and kind of do the thing. And then I see all the responses, and I'm like, well, I open ChatGPT o1 Pro. I put in the web page that he put up, and I'm like, can you give me a CSV file with name, address, phone, email, like from the page? Took it about 3 minutes and got the entire CSV. Click download, uploaded it back to Slack. I'm like, yeah. So that was like a case in point, right? So this is like the immediate response was all the SaaS that we know, right? All these scraping services that have been around for years, and they're great, absolutely great. And it's technology, so it's like, oh, here's the code you can deploy as well. Download, fork, deploy on your computer. It would have maybe taken him 30 minutes. But then, even for someone like me, I'm like, well, let's just do the shortcut and see if it can handle it, and it could. And so now it can for that use case. These super scraper SaaS, obviously they do way more sophisticated things. But at some point, it's just going to start eating up to that. Like it's going to, every company that's not building agents in their workflow is going to need to figure out what part of their business are going to lose. That's just like their daily reality right now.
Yeah, it's interesting times for sure. Like we're using PandaDoc as a SaaS solution for, kind of like a DocuSign alternative for proposals and statements of work and that sort of thing. And I can't imagine businesses like that having much of a runway in like the next 2-3 years.
Well, we just had, last year, the big biggest news, like in my eyes, was I think it was Klarna decided not to renew a $10 million Salesforce license. And Klarna had a lot of innovation. They are also one of the first ones that announced that they didn't. So they had a natural turnover of employees in their customer success, the customer support. It's not a long-lived position in most companies. And they announced they're not going to hire 700, meaning they're just going to let them organically leave the company, and they replace it with AI agents. And so not all of them, but a lot of their customers. So that was like a big news. And then a few months later, they announced that they're not going to renew this huge Salesforce license, because they figure they can just build, Salesforce is a monster. It's an incredible software, right? It has all the bells and whistles, right? But that's also the problem. Like most companies need 5% of all of it. So Klarna just figures we'll just build the 5% that we need. And that's huge. So I think for years in the computer space, right, like 80s, 90s, or 2000, it was all build, right? Like get engineers, build engineering teams, build your product, build capabilities. And then the SaaS revolution came. So, well, instead of building, let's lease it, right? Let's let other people build it, and we'll pay for a fraction of the cost to build in terms in usage, right? So instead of us setting up an engineering team and spending $10 million building something, we'll just pay 50 grand a year, 100 grand a year, right? And we'll pay on a per usage basis, on a per license, per seat, call it whatever you want, metered. Huge revolution, still the prevalent model, right, at this day. But what's happening right now is that the market is shifting back from buy to build, because suddenly building actually makes sense. Like, especially now, by the way, like at this point that, we're a few decades into advanced technology as a society, you have incredible engineers, incredible. You have at this point, like thousands of, just let's say Amazon alone probably graduated thousands of directors of engineering These are people that managed, dozens, if not hundreds of engineers under them, right? If they're that level at Amazon, just release into the wild. And that's just one company, right? So if you take all of FANG in Silicon Valley, you have incredible technical talent. And now one incredible engineer has the horsepower of dozens, right? Plus, with good leadership, you just don't need as big of a team. You can have, instead of you hiring what used to be a classic 10, 12 person engineering team, kind of a classic startup size, a few back end, a few front end, some QA, some project managers. Now you can do the same thing with like one person, two people, and get the same result faster, because people just care about the effect, right? So the fact that you can get the product working sooner, as opposed to, this huge, enterprise scalable system. No, scale is going to come later, and when scale is going to come, you're going to rebuild it again, most likely. I'm not talking about mission critical government NASA stuff, of course, but most products online are not that. They're just utilitarian, like they have a specific utility. So that shift from buy to build is incredible. This is also the first time. So when I first gave those talks in January and February 23, I said it's the first time, and I'm a startup guy, like we spoke about it earlier, right? Like I come from the startup nation, and it's in my bones. It's in my bones to think MVP, rapid, jet skis, not container ships, right? And I said, and because some of those talks were in front of, kind of 8-figure revenue business owners, 9-figure revenue business owners, some of them. And I told them it's the first time in history I think enterprises have more advantage than startups. Because what enterprises have, or incumbents rather, not enterprises, because what incumbents have, they have the business relationships, they have the data, they have the trust, they just didn't have the speed.
They have brand authority too, which is becoming more and more important as Google tries to thwart all the AI generated content. They're relying on brand more and more.
Who to trust. So the fact that they have the brand, they have the trust, they have the data, and now suddenly they get speed. That's huge. So now they can just get, people part-time, or a few people full-time to quickly build on stuff that startups never have. Startups take years to build trust. Startups usually build trust by either like extreme innovation, like they create something so new and so convenient, kind of like what ChatGPT did at the time, or by like visual appeal, right? Like, this is like fresh, fresh visuals, fresh aesthetics, fresh, copy, like fresh perspective on something. And then people, excuse the lack of functionality for the fact that it's pretty or convenient or stuff like that, even though it doesn't have as much functionality as the incumbent products. But now you can go to any of these tools and create an extremely visually appealing, brand. So the visual is out. Like there's no, it's like anything I say, even an amazing blacksmith still has a full-time job. All right, like the top of the top will always have a job. The best brand guy, best designer, best coder, best lawyer, all those people will have best doctor, will have a job forever, right? So the real differential is in the bottom and the mid, right? Where when a company now can create a great visual product in hours, right? And they can create, fully functioning pieces of code, also in hours and sometimes in minutes now we see, then startups have a problem. And we see it now, how many, like every week, ChatGPT and the other tools are releasing features, and you see the cemetery of VCs that put in money for startups that literally just became a feature, in these big products. So startup, like being really innovative right now is very interesting. I would say the big opportunity though is exactly for the promise of SaaS. In the early 2000s, remember how so many people it still is, so many people made money by creating a guide how to learn German, on this like small little website, and they made money with ads or like an ebook or stuff like that. I think that's happening again. You have that resurgence of people able to monetize their insight and their passions, because now they're getting the tools where the most common programming language is just becoming English. And they go into all these AI product generators. It's no longer code generators. They create full products. It's like with design and database and functionality and username passwords and automations, like the whole thing. And it's like it's abracadabra. You just share what you want to do, and it's like you have an entire product team working for you and fabricates it. And then people can, with add payments, add all those modules, and people can now create their own businesses, and small businesses can have the same functionality as large businesses for a fraction of the cost, truly a fraction. We just had in the news recently, right, about also these models that even I saw a funny tweet that ChatGPT got its job taken away by AI. With these huge transformation, because people are figuring out these crazy efficiencies. Like AI was already super efficient, and now they're discovering like 30x more efficiency on the super efficient stuff. And now we're in 25 and 26. It's probably going to be 50 times more efficient. That's actually another thing. I used to have this slide, still have this slide in the presentation, where I showed this example of an image with like 30 random objects organized in the shape of the word love, with a Hawaiian sunset background, right? It's like seashells and flip-flops and those kind of things, right? And I was saying, let's think about what's happening here. Let's say you worked with a good designer, not a great designer, and you called them up and you sent them an email and had a request, and it's like, hey, can you please create a graphic for me for my whatever website? And this is what I have in mind. Okay, 30 random objects, Hawaiian sunset and so on. And let's say he replied you, on WhatsApp in a minute. And he said, yep, no problem, got it. And let's say he charged $100 an hour. And if any of you work with designers, it's not a reasonable price for a great designer. And let's say he was like, yep, got it, and extremely efficient, was available right now, and he sent you back the results after an hour. Okay, let's assume that. Let's give you the benefit of the doubt. That's a thing, that scenario just happened. And then I go, and you can take that prompt I just said, 30 random objects organized in the shape of the word love with the Hawaiian sunset background, and put it in ChatGPT, put it in whatever your favorite image generated tools. You'll instantly get 4 options at least. And if you wanted 20, just say 20, right? 4 options at least that are spot on, 30 objects, with the word love, within a second. And from a computing perspective, that was like a fractions of a penny. And so, people talk about in business growth, when they have these paradigm shifts, about like 10x, right? This is something we hear all the time. 10x growth, 10x this, 10x exponential. But I'm like, people don't understand. This is a million times cheaper. This is a billion times cheaper, right? And a million times faster. This is not 10x. This is the big, I think some of the people, this is the underestimate portion of what's happening with AI, that people are just thinking this, oh, I'm going to move from 20% growth to 40% growth. Oh, we're going to save a little bit of money. I'm like, no. This is a billion times cheaper and a million times faster.
You need to look at a log graph to see the straight line up, because we can't really wrap our heads around exponential growth. But if we look at a log graph, we can see the exponential improvements in technologies. We can see the rise in price of Bitcoin, and we can see it going to the moon because it's just following a straight line on the log graph.
Yeah. And even on a log graph with AI, it's also look like a hockey stick because for some activity, like the best thing I recommend to people, like in their organization, the day of life, I recommend they do like a time study or an activity inventory, where they start just line by line. You wake up in the morning, what do? You kind of check emails, you write a letter for something, you go in a meeting, you take notes, just kind of scenes in your mind, just write them line by line. And then put a little note like how much time you're spending on this. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and try to abstract for a week or a month. Well, I spent 2 hours on this a week, 5 hours on that. And for some of those, to kind of try to figure out what are those useful spotlights that AI can really make a dent. And then you'll see for some of those activities, the 2 hours is going to become a minute. It's not 2 hours become a 1 hour. It's 2 hours become a minute. And there's a lot of activities in our human life and human society where that is the impact. It's that level of impact, and it's profound.
So give me an example. Give me an example of 2 hours becoming 1 minute.
Meeting notes, meeting reviews. Like, so right now for me, for example, so I work with multiple companies and as their CTO or chief revenue officer. And I tell them I don't do standing meetings. It's a big thing at the beginning. And I tell them I don't attend standing meetings, just not happening, but I'll send my AI. And my AI goes to all the meetings. And at the end of the meeting, depends on the meeting, there's a set of prompts. And I get a snapshot of what I need to know. And I get it on like Telegram and email. And if there's something I need to know, then it highlights it for me. So I call it like smoke detectors, right? And that's huge because what was the alternative? The alternative was either me going and actually like listening analog, like being in the meeting, or somebody else going, taking notes and then sending me the notes, right? Like an assistant or, someone like that. Or somebody in the meeting would have had to do it, like and flag me. And that's an instant, I don't have any, if you look at my calendar for a full month, I don't have anything like that. That alone, huge time saver.
Yeah. But then you also have the problem of hallucinations and it picking the wrong things to highlight from the meeting, coming to wrong conclusions. I mean, that's going to be less and less as that hockey stick goes further along on that log graph. We'll see, way fewer of these mistakes. But yeah, it's happening now, though.
It's an interesting thing because I joke about it actually, that all it does is hallucinate. Hallucination is a human judgment, right? Like we look at the phrase and say, no, it's not Stephan Weinstein. It's hallucinating, right? Like we put that judgment. From its perspective, it's pushing out words and statistics and probabilities, right? So the fact that you agree with something he said, it's kind of interesting. That's why I said like earlier, it's kind of interesting. So all it does is hallucinate. So hallucinate, the way we use it, as a label, is we have to describe we're getting a result we don't like. That's all we do like. Mm-hmm. And that's separate than getting something that's untrue. Also, it doesn't have a sense of truth, right? It doesn't have morals, it doesn't have ethics, it doesn't have standards, right? It just has corrections, like bumpers, right? When you're playing bowling or something. That's the best that it has. We look at something, like two humans can look at a statement and say it's true and not true, right? Put aside, what AI can do or should do. But certainly, I think business meetings are way easier than other stuff because there are some expected, there's a topic, there's subjects, there's speakers. If it's a good meeting, you know what a meeting is about. And that's where prompting really becomes super relevant, and then where the models make a difference. So this is where you do see a difference between something like right now in this modern times, between like an O1 or O1 Pro and a Sonnet model. And then when you're doing these automated prompt systems, just have at it. So for years, my assistant was labeling my emails. So an email comes in, we have one of four categories: action needed, high priority; action needed, low priority; content, just FYI, right? Or content, not important, kind of content, social reading or something. And at some point I told her, okay, I think we should train an AI to do this. And that's what we created. So I created an AI agent that has very extensive set of instructions. It's like, you are an AI agent for Lior Weinstein. He runs these companies. He does these things. These are his family members. These are the things. Plus a lot of examples. This kind of email, Lior would have labeled that. Why? Because of so-and-so. This kind of email, a lot. Like it's very, very, very long. Okay, like multiple pages. And then any email that comes in, we have like a make and an AI agent automation combo. Email comes in, and I run multiple inbox. I run about 12 inboxes. An email comes in into either one of them, takes the email, sends it to the AI agent. The agent returns a label, and then it goes back to Google and applies a label, and that's my inbox right now. So this is where, and my assistant hasn't labeled an email for me in over 6 or 8 months.
Where do we get this prompt?
That's the thing. It's a very I can show you one-on-one, but it's an elaborate chain of prompts. It's not a single one. And this is where, going back to like, how would you explain it to a person, right? Just talk to it like a person. That's the right mental model for agents. And then you train, and then you use these agent tools, which there's a lot. Like I like right now, and in this modern time, I really like Relevance AI. I like Rue AI. I like Lindy AI. These are all really solid agent platforms that you can quickly create those kind of products and services for you. And of course, there's all the open source universe, which is just open source is where it's at. Like, this is where the industry is going to go. There's no doubt. This is something we've been speaking about for a very long while, but now you're actually seeing this. It's competing on the big kind of commercial space. You can fight hallucinations right now. You have very strong models that can contain very large sets of context. And because you can give them these huge prompts, you can give them like, 100-page prompt that contains all heuristics, like everything you can think about, then that's pretty good. I would say my agent note takers and the prompts are way better than any human that I send it. No doubt. Are they better than me in terms of like catching some esoteric word, or somebody on Zoom just like, biting their lip, right? When somebody says something? No, they're not. By the way, in some cases, they're also paying more attention than I do, I would say. But I get my time back. There's nothing perfect. Obviously, if it's a mission critical meeting, I'm there. But that's why I referenced it as standing meeting. It's kind of regular operating meetings, rather than we're making the big decision, and who to hire, who to let go, what to do with the company. Those meetings are still coming.
And you mentioned earlier about context windows and like having a million input token limit with the LLM. You should take advantage of that. You should utilize that. Upload, hundreds of pages of policies and sample deliverables and things like that, so that it has a real sense for what you're trying to do and what you've produced in the past, so that it's not just kind of inventing from scratch.
That's right. This is why also large companies or established companies have so much advantage, because if they're well run, they have so many SOPs, like training SOPs, and a lot of knowledge that can be extracted out as instructions. Absolutely. Like, just shove as much as you can. Even right now, it's not at the point that any human, like the fact that you can put in the tax code and ask questions always with referencing the tax code, no human can do that. And that's why medical is, I have a friend, he just showed me that he specializes in very specific kind of medicine and fertility. And he showed me how just normal ChatGPT was able to find very unique anomalies in these X-rays that he has in the clinics. It's actually a version of like enterprise kind of private ChatGPT that I used. That 3 radiologists couldn't, right? Like, he sent it to 3 expert radiologists, they couldn't, and ChatGPT did. And that's already now. So I can't even, if you try to project 5 years from now.
Oh, even 6 months from now, right? Like the speed of change is, it's hard to wrap our minds around it.
I would say, one of my favorite topics though to talk about, I usually, the frame of my talks was usually, it's not the end of work, it's the end of boring work. And the reason why I framed it like that is because, one, I'm trying to get buy-in from the audience. Because the entrepreneurs, the CEO, they want AI, they want to push, but then you have people that are afraid of losing their jobs, right? So framing it as boredom, nobody likes boring work, because boring means something different. to everybody, and everybody has parts of their job that's boring and they would very much prefer not to do. So I frame it like that, and I tell them what I really want you to beware is artificial intimacy, the other AI. And I think that's where people miss, right? And I think the biggest opportunity of AI is for stuff like this, like to be more present. And I kind of say less bits, more atoms. So you can really express yourself. I had one of the questions I had in that first time in February, I was on stage kind of talking about this, February 23. And somebody asked about SEO, right? Favorite topic. And like, aren't I afraid that there's going to be this inflation of content or something online? I'm like, well, so I told him is sufficient content, and then like authenticity or stuff like that. I told them, one, last time I checked, every time you go to Google, you get about a Google results for everything you search. So I would argue there's already an inflation of content. B, if anything, you're going to get higher quality content because AI, unlike humans, has better standards of quality than most humans, when they write. But we talked about this issue of, and then I talked about ghost authorship. I told them, listen, a lot of books, if not most books you see right now, are not written by the authors per se, and they're written, but the insights in most cases, hopefully, is from the author, meaning the person had the insight, but they didn't have the words, they didn't have the wrapper, so they pay a writer that's very good with words, just like you pay a musician to write a melody, right? That's very good with melodies, right? But you're the one that came up with the insight, with the direction, and so on. And I told them, I don't think you would have had as much of like a loop in your mind if you just paid an employee to write something. Like for some reason, you think that using the AI means it's something else than you paying an employee. Well, if it's not you writing, and we're just arguing on the semantics, if it's the whole of humanity's statistical, knowledge about writing is writing, or Rhonda, is writing. To me, ethically, it's the same. I don't think you should present. I think when something is automatically generated, it makes a lot of sense to say something about it. In some cases, no, it doesn't matter because a lot of content gets published. We see white papers, PDFs. Nobody has authorship on it. Like the company, they can release a 50-page guide, and there's not like this was written by Mary, right? So I don't think in all cases it makes sense, but I think in some cases it makes sense. If you're like generating medical advice content, you should probably tell people, hey, this wasn't written by a doctor, because they're going to give it a different sense of trust, maybe more, right? But I think you should let humans know if they're about to make a big decision based on content. But otherwise, I think it's great. But I think the problem is when people mimic, when people use it to. That's why I see on LinkedIn, it kills me every time, where people have basically an AI written post, and then they have AI written comments. So it's like it's the machine creating the post, and then the machine replying to the post. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like that's to me artificial intimacy. Don't do that. You should absolutely use AI to write your social posts. Utilize, brainstorm, polish, make better. But it should be your content. And I called him out like in a couple of conferences. I'm like, I know, I was like, I'd given names, I was jesty about it, but like, I know you and I know you don't talk like that and you don't have that idea. So I'm like, the voices that people put out is very artificial. It's not authentic. And then you meet the person in real life and you're like, oh, you don't sound like that at all. And we've seen that, in other stuff when people write books and it's not really them, or they publish content, it's not really them. And I think that mismatch is a problem. And I think AI is actually exacerbating that and creating more artificial intimacy, like a sense of like, I feel you and I connect with you. And we see this with cold marketing now as well, cold email, cold reach outs, like people trying to hyper personalize with AI. But we also see that it's failing. I think one of the things that bothered me the most is when people talk about the pitch that you can make an AI version of yourself.
Yeah.
Impossible. And I'll share a last comment on that. The the reason why it's impossible to take, like, you've written a lot of stuff in your life, right? As an author, right? As a person, it's impossible to take all of your output and figure out how to recreate it. And the reason is because your decisions are not your choices. Just like you can't build an airplane by looking at it from the outside, the fact that whatever words you say, like I'm using words to say right now, but what I'm not saying is 100x more in terms of the choices that I have to say. And that's why it's impossible. It's impossible to take somebody's writing and actually make it look like it's the same person speaking. At best, it's mimicry, it's echoes. But here's the thing about humans. We're very good. We're like, you talk to your wife and something is like 1% off. Just 1%. Something a little bit, like, what's wrong? Immediately. Like our discernment on authenticity and alignment is so good. And AI, with the current technology, it can never get there. Can never. And every time I see that pitch, I kind of get a little bit of annoyed because it either tells me somebody is like bamboozling, or they just don't understand, and then they're presenting as if they haven't or something. So a lot of opportunities. It's really a transformation. I'm glad to be a part of it. I'm glad to be at this age, and be a part of it.
And I'm glad to be a podcaster in this age of inauthentic AI generated content, because I think podcasters are probably going to be the last to be replaced by AI.
This kind of podcast. Well, we already saw the, notebook LM, like auto-generated. Did you see that?
I know. That's creepy. Yeah. Yeah. And if our listener is not familiar with that, I'll include a sample of that in the show notes for this episode. But yeah, I know we're out of time, so I want to be respectful of your time, Lior, and our listener as well. I'm curious, do you have a video of your workshop posted on YouTube somewhere, or can we somehow get our listener get access to it? How can we learn from you?
I wish all of those were, either private workshops or I did them as part of like webinars for other people. But I do post a lot of content and insights now on my LinkedIn. And please, feel free to connect. I love meeting new people. And I love to educate about the topic. So I'll certainly find opportunities to do more like public service workshops over the next year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lior. And if our listener, perhaps they're a business owner, perhaps they're a techie and they have the chops to be a CTO or a fractional CTO, where should they go to potentially work with your CTOX fractional CTO company? Yeah,
we'd love to help you. Just go to CTOX.com. If you're a company that can use a fractional CTO, we say we can give you 100% of the outcome for a fraction of the price. We can help you find a best fit one. We have hundreds of them. And if you're a CTO thinking about a career change, please talk to us.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lior. And thank you, listener. Now take this information and do something amazing with it. Make the world a better place. We'll catch you in the next episode. In the meantime, have a fantastic week. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.